Traditionally, a lithophane is a very thin piece of porcelain etched with a design that can only be clearly seen when backlit. We're going to use a built-in feature of FlashPrint 5 that will allow us to import an original photograph that you've taken and convert that photograph into a 3D printable model, which, when backlit, will create the lithophane effect. In FlashPrint, click File, Load File, and we'll search for our original photo and open it. There are a variety of options here that you're presented. We're going to start by just printing a simple plain lithophane, a flat lithophane, but you'll see you can use other more fancy shapes as well. And we'll keep the defaults and click OK. And you'll see that the lithophane is laid down flat on the print surface. You can print it this way if you wish. It will print more quickly than the alternative method I'll show you in a minute. The problem with printing it flat, though, is that you end up getting a sort of topographic effect as the layers are being built up. And if you forget to turn off the infill, or rather if you forget to set infill to 100%, you'll end up seeing the honeycomb pattern throughout the lithophane, which, if you're doing that on purpose, it could be an interesting effect, but we don't want that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to zoom in so I can see this side edge, and I'm going to choose rotate, and if surface to platform is not selected, I'm going to click that, and what that will allow me to do is any surface that I double click will automatically be placed on the platform. So I'm going to double click on this edge, and you can see what happened is that the program stood up the model on edge. You can see the solid blue on the bottom, so it's resting flat on that surface. So we're going to print the lithophane standing up. That will eliminate the topographic map kind of effect, and it should produce a cleaner final product. You'll notice that the print is resting on a very thin edge, so we would be concerned about it falling over during the print. And to solve that problem, we're going to add a raft on the bottom to hold the print upright. So I'll close rotate, and now I'll click start slicing. And the first thing I'm going to do is click restore defaults, just in case there are any settings from previous prints that I don't want and that I forgot to change back. So for instance, if I printed in vase mode last time, I don't want to accidentally print in vase mode again now for this print. So instead of going through all the settings and checking them one by one, you can just click restore defaults and it will go back to the standard setting. So for infill, I'm going to change that to 100%. I'm going to add a raft. So from no to yes, and I'll click slice. And I'm getting a message saying that the model is out of range. So I'm not going to continue with that. I'm going to X out of here. And the reason it's out of range is because the program sized this model to maximize the space. So it's it's as tall as it possibly can be. And by adding the raft, we added just a little bit more material underneath, so that pushed the model further up than the printer can handle. So what we're going to need to do is downsize this image a little bit to make room for the raft on the bottom. I'm going to click Scale. But before I do anything, I'm going to make note of the Y dimension. So the Y dimension is the front to back dimension, and we want to make sure that that's the same in the end, because the program calculated the various thicknesses of this lithophane so that it wasn't too thick in any one place, so that light would be able to pass through and not get blocked completely, but also that the model wasn't too thin in the spaces that you want to be lighter in your lithophane. Because if the model's too thin, then you'll end up with a hole in the model, and that won't be good. So I see that this is 3.88. I'll go ahead and copy that. I'll make sure uniform scaling is on, and let's see, I'll knock it down, let's say 95%. That should give me plenty of room for the raft. Now I'm going to uncheck uniform scaling. I'm going to go back to the Y dimension, and I'm going to paste in the old Y dimension. So the Z and the X dimensions have been scaled down proportionally, but I didn't want the Y dimension to be too thin in any spot, so I'm setting it back to the default that FlashPrint originally set. Okay, so now I'll close that, start slicing, raft, yes. Just double check the infill to make sure, okay, that's still good. Slice. This is going to be a fairly complex model. You can see all the detail in there. That's why it's taking a little bit to slice. Slice preview. Okay, so you can see the raft holding up the model. And as I try to rotate it, it moves slowly because there's a lot of information here. This is a very complex model. That raft may or may not be enough to hold this onto the plate. So I may want to increase that just to be on the safe side. But you can see 4 hours and 54 minutes too. That's a long time. And it does take a long time to print a good lithophane. But if you take the time to print the lithophane as large as you can, given your printer's space limitations, and at a high setting, it will take a long time, but you'll get a better result. So for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to come in and reduce this even further. But that will mean that my final product won't be quite as nice as far as detail goes. But let's see, I'll copy that again. Uniform scaling. Let's say I'm going to this is really small, 50%. Okay, and I'm going to, again, remember to reset my Y dimension. And actually, because I shrunk this down in size, I don't need to increase the raft. Click Start Slicing, Raft. The margin for the raft was 5 millimeters, and for this smaller version of the lithophane model, that would probably be sufficient. But just to show you how the raft works, if I increase that to 10 millimeters and slice preview, you can see that the raft is twice as big as it was previously. And so the 10 millimeters measures the distance from the model to the end of the raft. Previously, or by default, it was 5 millimeters, and we added another 5 millimeters, so this is 10 millimeters wide. That would definitely be sufficient to hold this model to the build plate as it's printing. And you can also see that the amount of time was reduced significantly to 1 hour and 41 minutes. So, as a demonstration piece, I'm going to print this version of the model, but understanding that the quality is not going to be as good because I drastically reduced the size, the dimensions. So all of that detail will be sort of scrunched up into a much smaller area, so the total effect of the lithophane won't be quite as good. So if you want a nicer lithophane in your patient, you can print a full-sized one, and you should get a better result. I guess one more thing to note, too, is that because the effect of the lithophane depends on light passing through, it generally works better using white filament. If you have an opaque colored filament, it's not going to be as good an effect, although you might want that kind of effect. If you're using a colored translucent filament, you can get some interesting effects that way as well. But if you use white filament, then you end up with a sort of old-timey lithophane effect, right? Okay, so now all that remains is to download the model and print it. And here's the finished print. Doesn't look like anything special in its natural form, but if you hold it up to the light, you can see you get a lithophane type effect. This isn't working particularly well with this print because it's small and also it's not very bright out. But you can see the difference as I raise it from not backlit to backlit. Here in my office, where the lights are brighter, you can see the effect a little better.